Have you ever watched a flower slowly lose its color? Not because it lacked sunlight or water, but because day after day, it heard words that told it was too much, too delicate, too unnecessary. It doesn't wither all at once. It fades quietly, from the inside out. That's how some women live. Beautiful, sensitive, but slowly drying up under the weight of words that were never meant to nourish. Words that came not from love, but from fear, from control, from wounds that didn't know how to love back. There are women who learn to swallow pain just to keep someone close, who stayed quiet when something inside them screamed, who heard sentences that felt like soft daggers, phrases said with a calm voice but that carried a quiet violence. And yet, they stayed, not because they didn't know it hurt, but because they were afraid of seeming too emotional, too dramatic, too sensitive, as if feeling deeply were a flaw they needed to fix, as if silence were the price for being loved. Maybe you've done that too. Maybe you've heard something that made your heart contract, but you smiled anyway. Maybe you kept justifying his behavior, telling yourself it wasn't that bad, that you were just overreacting, that it was just how men are. But what if that moment, when you silenced your instinct, was the beginning of a slow abandonment, not his, yours, of your own truth, your own worth, your own voice? Louise once said, "You are not responsible for other people's behavior. You are only responsible for your own thoughts and reactions." And yet, how many of us carry the guilt of someone else's coldness? How many of us bend, adapt, become smaller, just to keep the peace that's not even real? Brené Brown reminds us, when we numb the dark, we numb the light. When you get used to tolerating what hurts, you lose touch with the part of you that still believes in joy, in respect, in love that doesn't confuse affection with manipulation. And the woman who learns to endure too much starts believing she's asking for too much. It's not always the shouting that breaks a woman. Sometimes, it's the quiet comments, the veiled criticisms, the subtle jokes that leave a sting, the way he says you're too sensitive, like it's a weakness, and the way she, for a while, believes him, until one day, she looks in the mirror and doesn't recognize the woman staring back. Because words don't just pass through us, they root, they echo, they shape the way we see ourselves. And when the words we hear most come from someone who doesn't know how to love us fully, we begin to wonder if maybe we're unlovable. That's not love, that's erosion. But the truth is, you were never too much. You were just with someone who was too little, too scared, too unequipped to meet the depth of your presence. And now, you are here, listening, healing, remembering. This video isn't about hate or blame. It's about clarity, about coming back to yourself, about learning to listen, not to him, but to that part of you that always knew, that part that flinched when he spoke, that part that whispered, even when you ignored it, "You deserve better." Now, what happens when we begin to name these words? When we stop making excuses for them and start recognizing them for what they are: warnings, signposts, invitations to leave before we forget who we are. Because maybe the problem isn't what he said. Maybe the real question is, what did you feel when you heard it? And why did you stay, even after that? We'll talk about that next. We'll talk about what happens when a man says, "You're too sensitive," and how that sentence, so small, so casual, can be the beginning of a woman's silence, or the start of her awakening. You're too sensitive. The subtle violence that invalidates your soul. It seems harmless, doesn't it? Just a comment. Just a few words spoken when you express your hurt, your discomfort, your truth. But when a man says, "You're too sensitive," he's not describing you. He's dismissing you. He's turning your inner world into an inconvenience. He's framing your ability to feel deeply as a defect to be corrected, rather than a strength to be cherished. And slowly, almost without noticing, you begin to question yourself. You wonder if maybe you do exaggerate, if maybe your heart should harden, if maybe love means tolerating what aches, staying silent to avoid conflict, pretending it doesn't sting when it clearly does. But here's the deeper wound. This isn't just about one sentence. This is about the message behind it. The message that says, "Your emotions are too much for me. Your reactions make me uncomfortable. I don't want to deal with your truth." And so you begin to filter yourself. You begin to hold your breath in the presence of someone who should be a safe place to exhale. When a woman hears this enough times, she doesn't just stop expressing. She stops feeling. She begins to abandon parts of herself, the tender parts, the intuitive parts, the sacred parts that warned her when something didn't feel right. Louise Hay said, "I now choose to treat myself with gentleness and respect. That's not a luxury. That's a necessity." Because every time you silence your sensitivity to preserve a connection, you are saying, without words, "He matters more than I do. His comfort is more important than my truth." But what if your sensitivity isn't the problem? What if it's the compass you've been trained to ignore? What if your tears aren't signs of fragility, but of wisdom? Because something inside you knows when love doesn't feel safe, when affection comes with the price of invisibility, when you're being asked to shrink so he doesn't feel overwhelmed. There is a quiet violence in this phrase. It teaches you to betray yourself in small doses. And the tragedy is, when you do this for long enough, you start to believe that love always requires sacrifice, that being loved means being less. But you are not too much. You are not too intense. You are not too emotional. You are just finally refusing to tolerate too little. There comes a time when a woman no longer wants to be tolerated. She wants to be understood. And if that understanding is not offered, she chooses to understand herself, to validate her own feelings, to give herself the permission she kept waiting to receive from someone else. Because the truth is, the moment he said, "You're too sensitive," what he really meant was, "I don't want to meet you where you are." And the moment you believed him, a part of you went quiet. But that silence doesn't have to be permanent. You can choose now to hear that voice again. The one that said, "This hurts." The one that said, "I don't feel safe." The one that knew something was off, even if no one else could see it. Because maybe it wasn't about being sensitive. Maybe it was about being awake. And your awakening doesn't need his approval. And what happens when love turns into a transaction of guilt? When staying is not about choice, but about emotional debt? We'll talk about that next. We'll talk about what it means when a man says, "You're lucky I'm still here," and how those words, quietly cruel, can make a woman forget the power of her own presence. "You're lucky I'm still here," when love becomes emotional blackmail. At first, it might sound like commitment, like perseverance, like someone who stayed when they could have walked away. But listen closely. This isn't love speaking. This is control wearing the mask of sacrifice. It's not a confession of devotion. It's a transaction of guilt. A reminder that their presence is something you must earn, as if being loved by them is a privilege, not a right. When a man says, "You're lucky I'm still here," he's not offering love. He's offering a warning, a reminder that your place in his life is conditional. And slowly, your worth starts to feel like something fragile, tied to his moods, his tolerance, his mercy. It's not love that's keeping him close. It's leverage. And yet, you may have stayed, not because it felt good, but because it felt familiar. Because somewhere inside, the wound of abandonment still echoes. That quiet fear. What if no one else stays? So you tolerate the coldness, the dismissals, the crumbs of affection. You tell yourself, at least he's still here, as if his presence is more valuable than your peace. But presence without care is not love. Staying without cherishing is not loyalty. And when you believe that his staying is a gift, you begin to see yourself as someone undeserving, someone who should be grateful for anything, even for what hurts. Louise Hay reminds us, "You've been criticizing yourself for years, and it hasn't worked. Try approving of yourself and see what happens." Approval, not just from him, from you. Because if you need him to stay in order to feel worthy, then every moment he threatens to leave, you lose a little more of yourself. There's a deeper grief in these relationships. The grief of staying when everything inside you wanted to go. The grief of being grateful to someone who's making you small. Of thinking you must earn a love that should have been freely given. And here lies the heartbreaking truth. The longer you stay in a love that makes you feel lucky just to be tolerated, the more you forget that love is not about luck. It's about reciprocity, reverence, choice. Because no woman is lucky to be in a relationship where her value is questioned. No woman is lucky to be with someone who uses guilt as glue. No woman is lucky to live in fear of being left while already feeling alone. If someone makes you feel like their presence is the best you'll ever get, that's not a partner, that's a captor. And the prison is built with your own self-doubt. But you have the key. You've always had the key. The day you realize you are not lucky to be loved, you are worthy of being loved well, is the day you begin to walk in freedom. You begin to see that staying in pain is not a virtue, that your loyalty must include yourself, that love should not be a wound you dress up as home. And what happens when he doesn't just make you feel guilty, but starts making you feel crazy. When your intuition is no longer your own, that's where we go next, to the moment when a man says, "You're imagining things," and the silent theft of your clarity begins. You're imagining things. The gaslight that steals your clarity. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from peace. It comes from confusion, from standing in a moment where your heart says, "Something's wrong," but the voice beside you says, "You're wrong." It's the subtle erosion of certainty, the beginning of doubt, not about him, but about yourself. When a man tells you, "You're imagining things," he isn't just rejecting your perception. He's rewriting your reality. He's planting a seed of mistrust in the most sacred place, your own intuition. And if it happens often enough, you stop questioning him and start questioning you. You begin to scan your thoughts before speaking. You wonder if maybe you are too emotional, too reactive, too suspicious. And that is how gaslighting works. Not with yelling, but with dismissal. Not with rage, but with calmness that makes you feel unreasonable for hurting. He says you're imagining it, and you believe it. Not because it doesn't hurt, but because you've been taught that your pain needs to be validated by someone else to be real. But pain doesn't need permission. Discomfort doesn't need confirmation. If something inside you recoils, pauses, or shrinks, it matters. It's real. It's worth listening to. Louise once said, "I trust my inner voice. I honor my intuition." That's more than an affirmation. It's an act of emotional sovereignty. Because when someone trains you to silence your instincts, they are asking you to abandon the only compass you truly have. There is a deep betrayal in this kind of dismissal. It's not just that he denies what you felt. It's that you begin to deny it too. You start editing your experience in real time. You rehearse your words before speaking. You weigh every emotion before feeling it out loud. And the worst part? You start to miss the woman you were before the self-doubt settled in. But she's still there, underneath the confusion, beneath the layers of gaslit apologies and second-guessing, the part of you that sensed the shift, that caught the inconsistency, that felt the coldness behind his warm smile. This isn't about being right. This is about being whole, about trusting yourself enough to say, even if no one else sees it, I do. About reclaiming the wisdom that has always lived in your body, even when your mind was told to ignore it. Because here's the truth. You don't imagine patterns. You feel them. You don't invent distance. You sense it. And if someone repeatedly tells you that your reality isn't real, they aren't loving you. They're training you to betray yourself in the name of love. But real love doesn't ask you to shut down your intuition. It invites you to trust it even more. Because true intimacy is built on safety. And safety can't grow in denial. It can only bloom in honesty. So if he says, "You're imagining things," ask yourself, what did I feel? And when did I begin to doubt it? Because maybe the moment you started to question yourself was the moment you needed yourself the most. And now we move into something even more subtle. The moment he tells the truth, one you don't want to hear. When he says, "I don't want anything serious," and a part of you decides to stay anyway, hoping that love can change what clarity already revealed. I don't want anything serious. A truth that many women choose to ignore. Sometimes the most painful wounds don't come from betrayal. They come from honesty we weren't ready to receive. When a man says, "I don't want anything serious," he's telling the truth. But the ache doesn't come from the words themselves. It comes from the hope we attach to them. The quiet belief that maybe, if we love him enough, he'll change his mind. It begins with a whisper inside you that says, he just needs time. You convince yourself that your kindness, your devotion, your patience will soften his resistance. You imagine that your presence will become irresistible. That your love will be the reason he changes. But love doesn't work like that. Love isn't a project, and your heart is not a tool to shape someone else's will. When someone says they don't want commitment, but still reaches for your body, your attention, your presence, they are not offering love. They are offering comfort without responsibility. And the woman who stays, she often stays not because she's naive, but because she's wounded. Because somewhere, the fear of rejection echoes louder than the truth in front of her. She believes that if she just proves her worth, if she doesn't ask for too much, if she becomes everything he wants, he'll choose her. But here's the truth. When someone truly wants you, you won't have to convince them. You won't have to shrink your needs to fit their capacity. You won't have to wait in the shadows of maybe. Louise reminds us, "I do not fix problems. I fix my thinking." Then problems fix themselves. And this is where the healing begins. Not in changing him, but in changing what we tolerate in the name of love. Because the cost of ignoring his truth is your own. The cost of waiting for someone to become ready is losing time you could be using to become free. And the most tragic part? Many women feel shame not just for staying, but for wanting more. As if longing for real connection makes them desperate. As if clarity were a weakness. But wanting commitment is not weakness. Wanting to be seen, chosen, honored, that is strength. That is sacred. That is your birthright. And if a man cannot meet you there, it doesn't mean you are asking for too much. It means you are finally asking for what is true. So the next time you hear, "I don't want anything serious," listen, not with fear, not with hope, but with clarity. Because what you decide after that is where your power begins. And what if the words go even deeper? What if he doesn't just avoid commitment, but tells you that without him, you are nothing? That's where we go next, into the heart of a sentence that mirrors our oldest fear. You're nothing without me. You're nothing without me. The voice that mirrors her deepest insecurity. There's a certain cruelty in this sentence. It strikes not just the ears, but the very core of a woman who has forgotten how to stand fully in herself. You're nothing without me. It's not just an insult. It's a mirror that reflects every internalized fear, every buried doubt, every lingering shadow of a voice she once heard in childhood or in the quiet after another abandonment. And that's what makes it dangerous, because part of her believes it. This phrase doesn't create insecurity. It activates it. It finds the softest part of a woman's story, the part that questions her worth, her desirability, her value, and it speaks directly to that wound. It says, "You were only someone because I chose you." It rewrites the past, minimizes her light, and tries to bind her identity to his presence. But the truth is, no one gives you your worth. Not a man, not a relationship, not his attention or approval. You brought your value into the relationship. You brought your tenderness, your wisdom, your capacity to love. And when someone says, "You're nothing without me," they are trying to make you forget what was always yours to begin with. Louise Hay reminds us, "I am deeply fulfilled by all that I do." Fulfillment doesn't come from who stands beside you. It comes from who you are when no one else is watching. And if you've forgotten that, it's not your fault. The world teaches women early on to look for their reflection in someone else's eyes. But sometimes, those eyes are not kind. Sometimes, they are distorting mirrors that show you only your fears. What's most heartbreaking is that many women who hear this sentence have already been doubting themselves long before. They've already been dimming their light. They've already been carrying silent guilt. So when a man confirms that inner narrative, it sticks. Not because it's true, but because it echoes. But the echo is not your truth. It's a ghost. And you don't have to keep living inside it. If someone tells you that you are nothing without them, it says far more about them than it does about you. It reveals their need to control, to diminish, to feel superior by making someone else feel small. That is not love. That is fear dressed as dominance. And the woman who believes this, she is not weak. She is wounded. But wounds can heal, especially when they are brought into the light. Especially when she begins to speak to herself with the words she's been waiting to hear from someone else. Because your value didn't begin with him, and it will not end with him. You are not a reflection of his presence. You are the reflection of your own becoming, of your own healing, of your own voice rising again. But what happens when that voice is silenced, not by cruelty, but by flattery masked as fear? When he says, "You'll never find someone like me," and you start to believe that losing him means losing your last chance at love, that's where we go next, into the illusion of uniqueness and the quiet fear of scarcity. You'll never find someone like me, when ego tries to dress as uniqueness. At first it sounds like pride, then like a compliment wrapped in warning. But beneath the surface, it's not about love, it's about power. When a man says, "You'll never find someone like me," he's not celebrating the connection. He's announcing a threat. A quiet attempt to root fear into your soul, that fear that whispers, what if he's right? And if you've been hurt before, if your heart has known rejection, if your body has memorized the ache of being left, those words don't just sting, they haunt. Because somewhere deep within, you've wondered the same thing. You've questioned whether your chance for love already came and went, whether maybe this is the best it gets. This sentence plays on the scarcity wound, the belief that real love is rare, that good men are few, that time is running out. It turns your longing into desperation. It reframes your desire for connection into a weakness to be managed. And once again, You are placed in the role of the one who must prove, who must hold on, who must not let go. But what if he's right? What if you never find someone like him? Would that be such a loss? Because maybe that uniqueness he offers is not a blessing. Maybe it's the way he makes you feel small in arguments, the way he disappears when you need closeness, the way he offers affection like a reward you have to earn. Maybe what makes him unlike anyone else is the way you started to forget who you were in his presence. Louise Hay teaches us, life brings to me only good experiences. I am open to receiving, but to receive something new, something true, something that mirrors your growth, you must first release what was built on fear. And fear is what that sentence feeds. It feeds the fear that you are unlovable, that your standards are too high, that if you walk away now, you might end up alone. But what is the cost of staying? What do you lose each time you agree with that voice that says you are lucky to be chosen instead of sacred to be cherished? Because you are not seeking someone like him. You are becoming someone unlike who you were before him. That's the real miracle. That's the true uniqueness. If a man truly believes he is irreplaceable, he wouldn't need to say it. You'd feel it. Not through intimidation, but through presence, through safety, through respect. Real love doesn't threaten you with absence. It shows up, again and again. So no, you may never find someone like him. And maybe that's the point. But what if the most painful part of all of this isn't what he says, but what you say to yourself afterward? The excuses you make, the stories you rewrite, the silence you swallow just to keep him close. That's what we'll explore next. The quiet cost of explaining away what breaks you, the small betrayals you make, just to keep love alive. The cost of making excuses for a man's words. It doesn't begin with a scream. It begins with a whisper, a soft moment where something he said pierced your chest, but you brushed it off. You told yourself he didn't mean it, that he was tired, that it was just a joke. You translated his coldness into confusion, his silence into mystery, his harshness into passion, and with every excuse, a piece of your truth fell silent. We do this not because we're foolish, but because we've been trained to prioritize harmony over honesty. We've been taught that love is something we preserve at all costs, that a good woman holds the relationship together, even if it's breaking her spirit in the process. So you begin to explain away what you feel. You defend the one who hurt you. You apologize for your pain. But each time you excuse his words, you dim your own. You become fluent in rationalizing the irrational. You say things like, he's just not good with emotions, or he doesn't know how to express himself, or worse, maybe I'm too sensitive, and this is how you disappear. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gently, softly, through 1,000 quiet moments of self-abandonment. Louise Hay once said, I say out to every negative thought that comes into my mind, no person, place, or thing has any power over me, for I am the only thinker in my mind. But what happens when the thoughts that echo loudest are not even yours? When the story you live is one you never chose, but one you kept rewriting to protect the love you hoped for? Empathy is sacred, but empathy that costs your peace is a sacrifice, not a gift. It's easy to believe that understanding him is the same as loving him, but if your compassion keeps you in pain, it's no longer compassion, it's captivity. There's a moment in every woman's life when she realizes that making excuses is not the same as making love last. It's a moment of reckoning, a quiet moment where she finally hears her own voice beneath the noise. A voice that says, this is not what love feels like. A voice that says, I've been rewriting his story and deleting mine. And from that moment on, something changes. She doesn't need him to change. She needs to remember who she was before she started explaining everything away. Because love should never make you feel like a stranger to your own truth. And when you begin to protect your truth the way you once protected him, something beautiful happens. You begin to come home to yourself. But what does it look like when a woman does come home? When she finally stops justifying pain and starts rewriting her life? That's what comes next. The story of a woman who lived through these words, believed them for years, and then one day chose to believe in herself instead. The woman who rewrote her script. After years of subtle abuse, she didn't wake up one day and decide to leave. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, like the sound of paper tearing after too many folds, like the last flicker of a candle that's been burning too long without being seen. She had lived for years in a space between confusion and hope, trying to translate pain into patience, trying to make sense of what never truly made her feel safe. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. His words were sharper when spoken softly. He knew exactly how to say something just vague enough to avoid accountability, but just pointed enough to make her question herself. "You're too sensitive. You're imagining things. You're lucky I'm still here." Every phrase left a mark, but not on her skin, on her sense of self. And for a long time, she stayed. Not because she didn't see, but because seeing meant losing. Losing the version of the relationship she had created in her mind. Losing the comfort of the familiar. Losing the hope that, maybe one day, he'd wake up and realize who she was, how deeply she loved, how much she gave. But pain has a way of aging us internally, of bending time, of turning minutes into years, until one day, she caught her own reflection and didn't recognize the woman looking back. She saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the hesitation in her voice, the dimming of a light that once felt sacred. That moment didn't change everything, but it changed something. It was the moment she stopped waiting for validation from someone who had built his power on her silence. The moment she understood that being unseen by him didn't mean she had no worth. It just meant he couldn't see beyond his own wounds. Louise Hay says, "I am in the process of positive change. I am unfolding in fulfilling ways." And for her, the unfolding began slowly. She started listening to herself again, trusting her feelings, writing down the words she was too afraid to speak out loud. "This hurts. I feel invisible. I am allowed to want more." And as she honored those truths, something shifted. His words no longer had the same power. They didn't echo as loudly. They didn't penetrate as deeply, because her voice had returned. Not the one he had silenced, the one she had hidden. It didn't end with a dramatic goodbye. It ended in stillness. She walked away without shouting, without explaining, because the woman she was becoming didn't need to be understood by someone who never listened. She needed only to be understood by herself. That's the quiet miracle of emotional awakening. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just a woman choosing not to respond, choosing not to justify, choosing not to wait. And that choice is everything. But what allows a woman to make that choice before the damage becomes her identity? What kind of boundary can protect the parts of her that still remember who she is? Next, we'll explore the most sacred threshold, the emotional boundary, the art of leaving, not out of anger, but out of deep remembrance. Emotional boundaries, the art of leaving before you forget who you are. There's a moment, quiet and sacred, when a woman realizes she's no longer asking for too much. She's just been asking the wrong person. A moment when the longing to be chosen fades, and in its place, something deeper rises. Not anger, not revenge, but memory. The memory of who she was before she began to bend. That's what emotional boundaries are. They are not walls. They are thresholds. A boundary says, "I remember myself." It says, "I know how I feel when I'm loved well, and this is not it." It is the silent voice that stands between the heart and the harm. The gentle but firm reminder that not everything that feels familiar is love. Because phrases like, "You're too sensitive," or "You'll never find someone like me," are not just words. They are messages. Messages meant to reshape your self-perception, to make you feel smaller, to convince you that love is something earned through endurance. And the more you hear them, the more your heart forgets what love actually feels like. But love should never cost you your clarity. It should never require you to silence your intuition. It should never ask you to remain in places that unmake you. That's the sacred purpose of boundaries. They are the line where your self-worth begins, the space between survival and soul. Louise Hay said, "I am in charge now. I say yes to life and no to pain." That isn't a rejection of people. It's a devotion to your peace. It's the strength to walk away, not because you stopped loving, but because you started remembering that your body keeps score, that your nervous system whispers when it no longer feels safe, that your silence shouldn't be the cost of someone else's comfort. A boundary is not built in bitterness. It is built in reverence. It says, "I won't let your confusion become my identity. I won't let your absence define my worth. I won't let your words be louder than my truth." And when a woman truly embraces this, she doesn't need to scream to be heard. She doesn't need to beg to be seen. She becomes a presence, a steady, rooted, luminous presence, and nothing unsettles someone who tried to break her more than her quiet refusal to be broken. This isn't about punishing him. It's about protecting her. It's about standing so firmly in herself that she no longer waits for permission to leave what hurts. She simply leaves, not in anger, but in alignment. And that is how a woman begins again. Now we arrive at the closing chapter of this journey, the moment she doesn't just walk away, but walks back to herself, fully, quietly, powerfully. Will end where her truth begins, with the day she believed herself, and walked away without explaining. It didn't look dramatic. There were no tears, no slammed doors, no final confrontation, just her, quiet, calm, and clear, standing in a stillness that didn't need noise to feel strong. That was the day she chose herself, not with fury, but with reverence, not to hurt him, but to stop hurting herself. She didn't need anyone to understand her decision. She wasn't seeking validation. The truth had already settled in her bones. She believed herself. She believed the moments she had dismissed, the feelings she had doubted, the intuition she had silenced. And when belief took root, doubt had nowhere left to grow. Louise Hay said, "I release all negative patterns. I claim my own power." That's what it feels like when a woman finally trusts the voice within her, not the one that pleads or questions or begs, but the one that simply knows that love is not meant to confuse, knows that respect is not a request, it's a right, knows that being chosen means nothing if she must abandon herself in the process, and she no longer needed to explain, because explanation is often the final attempt to be heard by someone who was never listening. She understood now. The only person who needed to hear her truth was her. Brené Brown reminds us, the courage to be vulnerable transforms the way we live, love, parent, and lead. Vulnerability is not staying in what wounds you. Sometimes, the deepest vulnerability is choosing yourself when it would be easier to stay numb. Sometimes, it's walking away, even when you still love him, but love yourself more. On that day, something shifted. She stopped negotiating her needs. She stopped making room for words that made her feel less. She stopped waiting for the apology that would never come. And in that silence, she found the one thing she had always been searching for: peace. She looked in the mirror and didn't just see a woman recovering. She saw a woman returning to her softness, to her strength, to her soul. The reflection staring back at her wasn't someone who had been abandoned. It was someone who had come home. Because the most powerful goodbye isn't the one that breaks him. It's the one that rebuilds her. If you've ever heard those words, if they lingered in your memory like smoke after a fire, I hope today's message offered you breath, space, light. And if something inside you stirred, if a part of you whispered, "This is my story too," then you are not alone. You are not broken. You are simply remembering who you've always been. Subscribe to this channel if you want to keep walking this path with us. Share this video with a sister, a friend, a soul who might need to hear it. And if you're ready to keep healing, to keep rising, to keep remembering, click on the video on your screen now. Your next chapter begins there.